An old man toddles up a rain-soaked alley to the accompaniment of a lush, over-urgent piano and sax soundtrack. He solemnly rides a freight elevator to an apparently abandoned warehouse laden with dusty, disused stage props. We soon gather B.J. Lang is profoundly lonely. This suspicion is first aroused when he starts expounding to himself on a complex delusion, familiar, evidently, to him, of being a driven movie director cajoling an imaginary cast and crew into a groundbreaking lensing of the classic Cyrano de Bergerac. Our doubts regarding Lang's sanity are redoubled when we learn that in contrast to his crew, costume mannequins all, his leading lady is flesh and blood Carlotta, whom Lang has abducted and tied to a wheelchair. We squirm as BJ harangues Carlotta, imagining that by doing so he will be able to coax from her a flawless performance as Roxanne. Tortured by hunger, meanwhile, Carlotta begs the crazed Lang to feed her.
I'm hungry, Mr. Lang. I'm hungry, Mr. Lang. I'm hungry, Mr. Lang. I'm hungry.
She then humors him resentfully as he coaches her on a key scene in Cyrano, next on his imaginary shooting schedule, in which Cyrano woos a flirty Roxanne over the rail of a balcony. As Lang, in his dreamed-up role as a director, feeds Carlotta Cyrano's lines, she seethes Roxanne's coquettish replies in a mix of rage and desperation. The attentive viewer is here struck at the ease with which the language of love can be transformed into a language of hatred, violence, vulnerability. No rewording is needed, just a change of mood and inflection.
Yes, there is danger. The danger of the gentle combat of love, where sighs and looks are slings and swords.
If that be so, and we are at war, what weapons will you use?
The rest of the movie is given over mostly to the strained interaction between Lang and Carlotta, who seems perhaps to be suffering from intermittent Stockholm syndrome. When Lang has a crippling heart palpitation, for instance, Carlotta begs him not to die, but it's unclear whether this is because she's found it in herself to harbor begrudging compassion for him, or whether she's terrified she'll waste away in her bonds without Lang to eventually set her free. Later, she manages to wrest herself from him and make a run for it through the labyrinthine warehouse, and a homeless squatter turns up briefly. But other than that, the Manipulator consists mainly of long, stylized exchanges between Lang and Carlotta, or interminable reveries as we glimpse the bizarre fantasies in Lang's feverish mind. During this, the main pleasure to be had is in marveling at Mickey Rooney as he chews up the scenery in French Renaissance garb and false nose, or in faintly gruesome drag. In fact, his performance is so bizarre that you figure Yablonsky must have expected his audience to find it laugh-out-loud funny, though probably not as funny as you're actually likely to find it. In addition to Rooney, Yablonsky has an ostensible asset in Luana Anders, whose experimental pedigree was solid in 1971 after then-recent outings in Robert Altman's now-overlooked That Cold Day in the Park, as well as the classic Easy Rider. Anders is unable to import any of the gravitas of these superior movies, though. Her performance ranges from univocal to grating, and it doesn't help that Yablonsky constrains her to the same degree that he lets Rooney run wild. An ambitious movie with a worthwhile premise and surprisingly agile thespianism from Rooney, The Manipulator suffers from what is, even for the sleepy standards of the time, excruciatingly lumbering pacing and a self-indulgent air that makes it a hard film to engage. The director seems so focused on earning the right to call Manipulator an experimental film that he too readily forgoes exposition for attempts at tours de force. As a result, we spend far too long sitting through interminable talky scenes punctuated with long pauses and suspense-free chase sequences smothered in arty slow-motion shots. Apparently, Yablonsky fought to get a high-speed camera, still a rare and pricey commodity in those days, and damned if he wasn't going to use it. I found myself hungering for this wasted screen time to instead be devoted to unraveling the backstory. We get some free-floating, surreal flashbacks to Lang's childhood, which we're led to conclude took place during some sort of never-ending oversexed costume party. But beyond that, we're left with more questions than answers about how he and Carlotta came to be in the situation they're in. Was Lang a big-name movie personality driven insane by the shadow of his former greatness, a la Nora Desmond, or a jealous nobody made mad by his exclusion from a world of fame that obsessed him, a la Rupert Pupkin? What was his relationship with Carlotta, and how did she fall into his clutches? How long has she been his captive? Does anyone know her? Has anyone noticed she's gone missing? And is anyone looking for her? Is she an actress in reality, or just another nobody? We don't know the answers to any of these questions, and touching on them would have benefited the movie greatly. That said, The Manipulator isn't totally without points of interest. The alignment between Rooney's then moribund career and that of the character he's playing is clever, for one. Manipulator was presumably meant as a comeback vehicle for Rooney, but that would have to wait for the mainstream children's feature The Black Stallion in 1979. Rooney's wild-eyed monologues as Cyrano are often captivating. Larry Cohen's set design is inventive and inspired, which might explain Yablonsky's inability to resist overutilizing it. And the soundtrack from the fertile mind of Gil Mallet predictably excels. Like so many low-budget experimental movies of its ilk, the work of Henry Jaglom springs to mind. The Manipulator has a reach that exceeds its grasp. Its long, dreary stretches make its sophisticated moments more rewarding, though. For instance, when a fleeing Carlotta holds Lang at bay with a spotlight, and bedazzled, he begins fencing the light, enabling her to run off. Or earlier, during his stint in drag, when he praises his imaginary makeup artist.
You know, when I used to make up Marilyn's eyes, she used to say, "They aren't my eyes. They're our eyes."
Both scenes hint cleverly at the idea of the artifice that masks no firm underlying reality. The actress with no true face aside from the one the makeup artist creates for her. The stage light that, for the mad B.J. Lang, defines the limit not of the phony dream of stage or film, but of reality itself. Also interesting are the occasional eerie magic realist touches, such as the genuine actors interspersed without explanation among Lang's mannequins. When Carlotta flees Lang, she enters a strange fugue. We evidently enter her mind as the dusty costumes she's fumbling through become racks of beef, which give way, randomly, to a string quartet playing placid classical music. It comes across as nonsensical at first, but on reflection, the racks of beef seem a transparent stand-in for Carlotta's terror, her sense of claustrophobia and impending death, and the quartet a stand-in for that inner serenity, that secret place we're sometimes rumored to find in ourselves at times of peril and extremity. The scene leads neatly to the Manipulator's climax, which I won't reveal except to say that it signals simultaneously that Lang's cinematic fantasy might not be entirely in his own head, and that for him mortality is a menace against which he is helpless, that, unlike Carlotta, he has no place of inner refuge. For several years after The Manipulator was finished, it was evidently never released theatrically, Yablonsky enjoyed somewhat greater success with a stage adaptation of the same story called B.J. Lang Presents. This is fortunate. A reinterpretation that explored some of Yablonsky's ideas in greater depth, while steering clear of his tedium and pretension, would be even more welcome. For all its shortcomings, The Manipulator is a movie whose images and ideas tend to linger in the mind well after the movie ends.